Speaking of which, Lepore,
Yeah.
looking at the betting odds for the Canadian division, or the North Division, I should say.
Yeah, yeah.
The Leafs right now are the overwhelming favorite at plus 125 to win the North Division. And I'm sure, as a lot of hockey fans know, you're only going to be playing teams this season in your division. There's 56 games. So the Leafs are going to play the other Canadian teams either 9 or 10 times. And what are your thoughts on the Leafs being the heavy favorite here? Do you think they're going to win the division?
Hear the hesitation, everyone, just to go on episode 1 and say the Leafs are going to win the division. I think they will. I think they will. I think they have the best players. I think if we go through the lineups of these teams, I think the Leafs have the most game breakers, and I think they have the highest ceiling out of all these teams. That being said, if I looked at it from a playoff perspective, that's a whole different conversation. Over 56 games, I think the Leafs will be at the top of the division. But then I do look at certain teams in the division and say, that's not necessarily a team I'd like to run into in the playoffs. So in terms of the regular season, yeah, I would have the Leafs slotted in first place. How about you?
I'm right there with you. I think these betting odds right now are bang on. I think the Leafs should be the heavy favorite to win the division. I think they're the most talented team. Now, you can argue that, a team like Edmonton, has, and you know what? I don't even want to say they have better offensive talent. Their top 2 guys are like 2 of the top 5 players in the world right now.
Yeah, they're ridiculous.
But other than that, their depth isn't great, right? And then you look at the Canucks. I really like their top 6. They lost a little bit of depth. Their goaltending's a little bit shaky right now with Holtby and Demko, losing Markstrom. The Flames, they have some nice pieces as well, but they're a team that talent-wise I don't think stacks up to the Leafs. And then the Jets. The Jets have a fantastic top 6. We all know that they can score, but their defense core is a mess right now. And I know they have Connor Hellebuck, who's the reigning Vezina Trophy winner and one of the best goalies in the game, but when you look at the other teams in this division, I think it just becomes clear that with the additions the Leafs have made in the offseason, and now they put the whole Babcock situation behind them, because I don't think people, realize sort of the roller coaster season that the Leafs went through at times last year. There were such high expectations on them. They came out of the gate just horrifically. Okay. The whole Babcock situation was a mess. They win 9 of their first 23 games. So Sheldon Keefe comes in middle of the season, basically has no time to work with this group. And I understand that he coached the Marlies, so he has familiarity with a lot of these guys, but he was never able to fully put his stamp on this team. And when Sheldon Keefe came in, from the moment he coached his first game till the end of the season, the Leafs had the 8th best record in the league. They were the number 1 offense. They were the 2nd power play unit behind Edmonton.
And they had injuries, and they had injuries on top of all that too.
Exactly. They were so depleted. They were like one of the top 3 to 5 most injury depleted teams in the league. Guys in and out of the lineup. The goaltending situation was a mess behind Anderson. Anderson wasn't even himself. He had one of the worst seasons of his career. And despite all that, Lepore, they were a playoff team. And I think, if the final 12 games of the season had played out, I think they would have comfortably made the playoffs, even though it was getting a little bit dicey there. Yeah. So just putting all of that in perspective and looking at the changes they've now made in the offseason. And again, they've altered the fringes of this roster, right? They haven't touched the core. I think the core is good enough. And I think they're the most talented team in the division. And I do think they're going to win the North Division. And like you said, when it comes to the playoffs, that's maybe a different beast. Let's wait and see who they're going to be matched up against. Obviously, the first 2 rounds are going to be against a Canadian team. Right. And you would think that bodes well if the Leafs are the best team in the Canadian division. But that remains to be seen. So, Lepore, I guess moving on from that, we're both on the same page with the Leafs winning the division. What worries you most about this team this season? And do you think there's any chance they miss the playoffs? Like what has to go wrong for this team for a situation like that to play out?
I guess you would circle it as a good thing, but there's nothing specifically that really scares me about this team. And I think that's kind of a representation of like the balance they have. And not to fully get back to it, but you mentioned the other teams in the Canadian division. I think with every other team in the division, there is something specific you have to circle for that team to be successful. For example, Edmonton. Everyone would say, well, Draisaitl and McDavid have to light it up. For the Jets, you'd have to say Hellebuck has to be the man again. Montreal, they need Price to be Carey Price to keep them in games, win games for them, go deep, all that. Whereas Toronto, I don't think there's one thing that you really point to and say, Matthews has to score whatever amount of goals. No, if Matthews doesn't hit his full expectation, they can still be good. If their goaltending's not A+, well, no, they can still work it out. I mean, there's a lot of questions with the D, and we all know that, but that's kind of more of a broad perspective. The only thing to me is, and I guess a lot of fans could say that, is with all the changes we've had, the moving parts, a slow start. I think we can maybe get fucked with a slow start. And two, even with the way the division is set up, a lot is going to come down to, and I don't think it's getting talked about enough, to be honest. There's going to be, each division is going to have one or two really bad teams. Now, people in the Canadian division would say circle Ottawa and be like, hey, Ottawa's got a lot of young kids. They're going to be a bad team. I actually think Ottawa's going to do a lot better than people think. But at the end of the day, it's going to be someone that's at the bottom. So if you look at the way a 7-team division plays out, if 4 teams make it, that's a 500 record, essentially, with basic math, should get you into the playoffs. So what it could come down to is how bad you beat up on the bad or bad teams. So if you play the worst team in your division 8 times and you go 6-2 against that team, you're in the playoffs. Like, you go 500 the rest of the way, you're in the playoffs. And in the past, the Leafs have not been the best team against the teams they should beat. So that's something that scares me a bit, that we could look at the end of the year and point to the worst team in the Canadian division and say the Leafs went 500 against them, lost a couple of shootouts, and they should have more points than they should have. Or, oh man, they could have been first or had home ice advantage even in second, but now they're third because they lost these games near the end of the season to this team they should have beat, just being the Toronto Maple Leafs, and Leafs fans know what I mean by that. Like, I kind of have a fear in that, but I mean, that all being said, I guess maybe any fan who's negative on their team and been through a lot can say that. But for me, yeah, it's just a fear of a slow start with all the changes and the history of this team to kind of put the nail in the coffin against bad teams and just go on the road or whatever and get points, or even at home for that matter. Saturday night, Hockey Night in Canada, you're playing a bad team. The bad team they're playing scores in 30 seconds, and now we're chasing a game. Just get those points. Get those points you're supposed to get. As for missing the playoffs, like, I can't really see that. Again, like 7 teams, 4 teams get in. You should go about 500. I can't. That would be a disaster. Like heads are rolling if this team misses the playoffs.
Oh yeah, if they miss the playoffs in this division this season with the team they have assembled, it's a stone disaster. I mean, everyone's head's on the chopping block. Dubas's head is on the chopping block. I don't think it's going to get there whatsoever. And it's like you said, beat the teams you're supposed to beat in this division, right? And yeah, I know Ottawa, they had a really good offseason, and I like the team. I like the team that they're assembling there and some of the young players they have. But that's a team that most likely is going to finish at the bottom of this division, right? So don't screw around and go, 5-4 against Ottawa or 4-5. I mean, that's a team you gotta punish, right? Those are the teams that you got to go 7-2, 8-2 against, right? So I'm kind of on the same page with you there, that really, barring a disaster and maybe barring, a devastating injury to one of the top players, I mean, I don't think there's any chance this team misses the playoffs. Now, if they do suffer injuries like they did last season, maybe they don't win the division, but I still think they're certainly a top 4 team. So we're both on the same page there, Lepore, which is, I guess, good or bad, depending on how you're looking at the entertainment value of this podcast.
Once there's games, I'm sure we'll disagree. Yeah, once there's games, we'll have stuff to fight about.